he said sick and ball. And what I heard was Chopper, sick balls. Yep, this week Rob and I will be covering one of the most beloved and undoubtedly timeless movies of the 80s. Rob Reiner's outstanding adaptation of Stephen King's equally outstanding novella, Stand By Me, or The Body as the novella is named. A movie that was and remains, I mean, not such a big part of just my youth, but pretty much everyone I know growing up. It's like movie fan or not, if you're over, say, like 30, 35, then there's a big chance that Stand By Me is a legitimate, important movie for you. Like, everyone I know loves this movie, and everybody has like a special attachment to this film. Yep. And I'm like, why does it have such a lasting impact, do you think, this film in particular?
Before we go into that, it's not just that, though, is it? Because even for people who haven't watched it, if they watch it now, this age, it's one of those rare films where people will actually go, my God, that reminded me of my friends growing up. And things like that. So it always
that's the reason, I think.
Yeah, but it always has that attachment. So it's not even for people growing up that have that, watching this film when they were kids. It's people who watch it now who've never seen it before as well.
I think it's one of those rare films.
Nostalgic effect. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But what was your question again? Sorry.
No. I think you've kind of already answered it to a certain extent, or at least started to answer it. And I think the reason it's so important for people, and you obviously got to the point already, as regardless of whether you watch this as a kid or watched it now, it's a movie that works at both ends of the spectrum. And I think that's why it's like stood the test of time so much, because obviously when you're younger, you're immediately associating yourself with the kids. Yeah. And you're like, oh, that looks like a quote unquote adventure. I mean, there's some pretty dark stuff in this film, but you can immediately kind of attach yourself to the four leads. But this movie, and obviously the book as well, there's also the other side to this story, is Gordy looking back on what happened as a kid and the melancholy that's associated with that. And as you say, you use the term nostalgia, and obviously it's a word you can't escape when you watch this film. And it's not, obviously a part of that for some people is nostalgia for the late 50s, or for us, it might be watching movies from the 80s. But really what it is just, I think, a nostalgia for youth. And I mean, it's one of those things they keep coming back to and over again. I mean, one of the lines, the famous lines, I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone? It's like so many people can relate to that. And that is the other side of this film. It's like, yeah, it's a story about all these kids having this adventure together, the importance of that group of best friends at this time of your life when you're ostensibly becoming the person you're going to be for the rest of your life. But at the same time, you're, looking back on this moment and being like, that's gone. I'm never, as great or as bad as that might have been, I'm never having that again. Well, and there's that sense of melancholy which runs all the way through the film.
We've discussed this so many times, maybe not on this podcast, but about growing up. The fact that you would, especially during the summer holidays as well, you would go out with your friends at like 8 a.m. and not come home until the streetlights turned on.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done. All right, they've done it over a weekend, but it's just you've disappeared. You've had all these adventures in a day. You've built dens. You've traveled to parks. You've gone further than you ever thought you were going to go further where you live. Do you mean you think, oh, like I've gone miles? You think you've gone miles when you probably have. You've
just gone around the corner.
Yeah, but it's absolutely fantastic, and it's that sense of adventure that it gives you, and the camaraderie that you have with the people that are around you.
Yeah, well, everyone's in the same boat together, aren't they?
Yeah, and this film just brings that close, because even though in this film, even though everyone knows the dark past that most of them have got, I mean, we don't know much about Jerry O'Connell's Vern.
He's the only one who, according to, like, rewatching the film, he was the only character who didn't have like this dark underside, like this dark side to his character or dark side to the story. Obviously, they're on this fun adventure, but Teddy, Gordy, and Chris, it is Chris, isn't it? I'm not making that up.
No, it's Chris, yeah.
Chris Chambers, yeah. They all have these like dark relationships with their families, but like some pretty messed up stuff, which is kind of alluded to for some of them and outright said. I mean, Gordy, you think is probably the most level-headed kid, but the stuff with his dad is fucked up.
Well, not just his dad, his mum full on ignoring him. I mean, his dad pretty much speaking to him, but actually telling him, in his own words, it should have been you.
Well, right, and I don't want to kind of get off this train of thought, because it is an interesting, I think, an important point for the film. But that scene, when I was watching it again, the bit when he looks down at him, and because that is some dark shit, when your older brother's just died, and your dad looks down at you and says, it should have been you. Do you think it's implied that he actually said it, or that's how he's remembering it.
That's how he feels. That's how Gordy. Yeah, it's Gordy. Yeah. That's how Gordy feels, because the way his parents are acting or treating him at the moment, I don't think his father said it, but I think that's how
I read it. Yeah,
how he's getting the vibes from his dad. Even the way his dad talks to him after Gordy finds the cantina in his brother's room. And he's like, well, why can't you have friends like your brother? It's everything you've done. And you go to the flashback on the table where all he's talking about is football.
Denny's achievements, isn't it? It's all Denny.
And John Cusack turns around and goes, do you read Gordy's story?
Yeah.
You know? And it's all about, and he is quintessentially the best big brother that you can have. You know, he's looking out for his little brother. He's fantastic. And again, but that could just be what Gordy's remembering.
Yeah. You know, I mean, that's how I saw it. And as I said, like, it actually, like, rewatching it again, like, I think out of everyone, he's got the most, and I don't think that's a surprise, because even amongst the four of them, and as important as, you know, the two major leads really are River Phoenix and Will Wheaton, without question. But I still think, you know, there's no surprise to say that Gordy is the kind of the glue of the film. And he's actually maybe the one he has the most interesting arc, because he's the one, and I'm talking about that kind of personal journey, because a lot of them know where they are, I think. Even Chris, like, you know, he outright says it. Like, he knows the situation he's in. He knows the family he's got. And, like, he's got two of the coolest kids in the world, like, around him. Obviously, his brother had died, but you've got John Cusack, who's just the coolest guy in the world and the coolest big brother in the world.
Yeah.
And you've got River Phoenix as his best friend, who, again, he's so perfectly cast, and he is so fantastic in this film. And of course, we can talk about lost talent and what he could have been, but you really can see it from a young age with River Phoenix in this film. Like, he stands out like a sore thumb as the talent in this film. Like, he's so fantastic. And sorry. I'll just keep going a second. And it's like it's the two coolest kids in the film. They're the only people in this world, as far as we see it, are the ones who actually notice that Will Wheaton's character, Gordy, he's the talented one. It's like, it's like Denny's the talented footballer, and Chris is the cool, handsome kid and stuff. But it's clear to both of them that Gordy's the talented one, and they're trying to get that through to him. It's like, Gordy wants to be like those two, but he can't be, because he's a bit of a geek. He's a bit awkward, and he's not as handsome as John. I mean, who's as handsome as John Cusack and excuse me, River Phoenix. And he wants to be those guys. And they're the ones telling him, it's like, dude, you're not like us, and that's fine. It's like, we're going to be here for the rest of our lives. You're the one who's got something special, who's going to go off and do something amazing in the world. And it's like, a big part of this film is Gordy realizing that. It's like getting over his own insecurities, which obviously have been exaggerated by what's happened to his brother.
But it's the way he's like, because Chris, for lack of a better word, Chris is the den mother. Like the alpha, but he's not
den mother.
The den mother.
I've never heard that. I completely get it, but I'd never heard of that term before.
You've never heard that term?
No, it's a great term, though.
He's the one looking out for everybody else, isn't he?
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean, when he pulls Teddy off the tracks, he's got.
Oh yeah, he's the one who gives him the dressing down afterwards, isn't he? It's like, you get yourself killed and stuff.
The way he looks, like he won't let Gordy get into his own head. Even to the point he says, I wish I was your dad, because then you would realise how good you are.
He doesn't want him to accept the world. He's like, Gordy wants to just be with his friends. And he's the one, Chris, who feels obliged to say, listen, your parents aren't saying it because they're assholes. So I'm going to have to be the one to say, listen, you're the talented one. Your parents are right. Like, you shouldn't be hanging around with us, because hanging around with us, as much as they all love each other, as much as they love Teddy, they love Vern, it's like, Chris can already see the writing on the wall. Chris is like, listen, I'm going nowhere. And those two are fucking definitely going nowhere. But you need someone to give you a kick up the ass, which your parents aren't going to do for you. Like you said, the den mother role, or the father figure.
Yeah.
And that role, and again, it comes back to that performance. Like, if you didn't get the casting right on Chris, those lines would fall completely flat. But you can imagine, like, if Chris was your friend and he was telling you that at 12, you totally buy into, like, fuck, man, Chris knows his shit.
It's ironic that you say that, though, because River Phoenix actually went for Gordy.
Yeah, well, that was wrong. Like that's like Tom Hiddleston going for Thor. It's like, yeah, it happened, but thank the Lords, thank the gods, no pun intended, that it didn't happen, because River Phoenix is so perfect for Chris, because you have to believe him as both being an authentic character, a nice guy, but also tough. Like, you know who his brother is, you get these hints at his family. If you don't buy into him having that tough side to him as well, which he never really shows, like he never overtly goes around, punches anyone, stuff like that. I mean, obviously he stands up to Ace, earlier in the film.
Yeah.
And of course he's got the look, the rolled up sleeves, that kind of classic.
Rolled up sleeves with a cigarette packet in them.
Oh, dude, come on. It still looks cool. It still looks cool. But yeah, you just buy into everything that River Phoenix is about. And, you see it in these other films, like, you've seen since how hard it is to kind of cast a young Harrison Ford. And you think about, like, even in that short period, I'm not going to make this the River Phoenix podcast, but you think about the opening to The Last Crusade, and the impact he has at the start of that. And because of the way he carries himself in those opening, 10, 15 minutes, I'm like, fuck, you absolutely buy him as not just a young Harrison Ford, but a young Indiana Jones. And he sells you on that in like 10 minutes in the opening sequence. It's unbelievable. And it is a bit of a shame.
You wonder if he would have actually been young Indiana Jones in the Chronicles, if he was still...
I think he would have been too big a star. Like he was going to be Brad Pitt level. Like there's just, it's sometimes it feels like it's easy to say, oh, if this might have happened. But everything about him suggests that he would have had a Brad Pitt level career, where he probably would have struggled against his talent versus his looks, where he keeps getting like kind of cast in these so-so roles for his looks, but really he's just looking for challenging roles. And you think about what his brother's done, like how talented his brother is. And, River Phoenix, and I don't mean this as a slight on his brother, but he also had the looks as well. Like he was a handsome kid. There's no two ways about it.
Check out your man crush.
No, I'm just saying, if you're talking about somebody who shows up on the team, on the scene, Jesus Christ, and ticks every box to be a potential movie star, it's like he just ticked every box. And you just think there is that, like, that sliding doors. Like, if he had survived, like, what other films he would have done, It's just, it's a bit of a, obviously his is completely unique to the other characters in the film, but it's strange that none of them really went on to become massive movie stars. Like, they all had their runs. Like Corey Feldman, we'll get to later, obviously he had an amazing run, but none of them are big movie stars today. Although, Vern is married to Rebecca Romijn, so he's not down at the fucking... Who thought fucking Vern would end up marrying Rebecca Romijn? What universe do we live in? It's
whose
insane.
favourite film was Stand By Me, but she never told him. She had his posters on the, like, not just his, but she had the Stand By Me posters on the wall and everything.
Nobody, yeah, okay. As long
nobody
as you didn't say,
hey, you leave. You leave the fat guy of the group alone, right? Just leave him alone. Just move on.
Listen, I'm not going to be a dick, but nobody had a fucking Vern poster on their wall when they were growing up. Nobody, even Rebecca Romijn, and she married fucking Vern.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ.
Look at fucking Vern now.
Oh, that's what I mean. Like, Nobody saw that. Like, he lost a bit of the big, like, Jesus Christ, that's a handsome boy. But even him, it's like, he's the one where he was maybe inching towards it. Like, he played Cush. I'll always think of Chris O'Donnell as Cush from Jerry Maguire, and from his role in Sliders.
Right, I gotta call you up on that. I gotta call you up on that.
What, Sliders?
No, Chris O'Donnell, not Jerry O'Connell.
Jerry O'Connell, Chris O'Donnell. Yeah, you do have to call me up on that. Fucking hell, I missed it. I feel like there's no excuse. There's no excuse.
No, Chris O'Donnell, Jerry O'Connell. Like,
and I really don't like Chris O'Donnell either. It's like Jerry O'Connell should have had Chris O'Donnell's career at the very least.
Right. Anyway, we are going way off. We talked about Gordy's backstory. Vern didn't have a backstory. We've got to talk about Teddy's insane upbringing.
Yeah, and Teddy's another one, because he has that, he doesn't get as much screen time, obviously, he does have as much screen time, but doesn't kind of take up as much of the oxygen of the movie. So it's kind of more, it's thrown out here and there, these moments, obviously the great scene in the junkyard,
Yeah.
Where it's like, and how embarrassing that would be. It's like not your friends ragging on you. It's a stranger.
Calling your dad a loony, yeah.
Oh, yeah, loony.
Because was it for 1959? That is... Well, that's like calling somebody a witch. Do you know what I mean? It's just...
Yeah, well, it's just that, obviously he's got this strange relationship with his dad, and it's visibly on him. Like, he literally carries around the scars of his relationship with his dad with his ear.
They never actually... Because you learn a lot about his upbringing from voiceover from Richard Dreyfuss.
Mm-hmm.
But his mother's never mentioned until right at the end when he said, "I'd better go before my mum sends out a search party," or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So the way you always, like... Because when it first starts, he said, his dad held his ear to a stove and nearly burnt it off.
Yeah.
And you're kind of just thinking that he still lives with his dad. And then you get more with the junkyard then where he says, "No, your dad's up in Looney Bin."
Oh, the Looney up in Togus.
Yeah. And then it's like, "Oh yeah, I live with my mum," and it's just little. You're getting drip fed stuff from it, but I mean, he idolizes his father. Like, you can see the way he dresses, the way he acts. I mean, my dad stormed the beach at Normandy. Idolizes it. His father could do no wrong. And then if you look at his ear for. Your dad can definitely do wrong. That is just such a huge... It's really interesting the way they take on PTSD in this, where it's never actually said. It's just little things that they've actually said and done. I think I've lost you. Apologies there. We had a bit of technical difficulty. I do apologize if you're going to hear me repeat myself, but I just wanted to go back over how interesting they approach PTSD in this. They don't actually say it. Like, they don't say, they just, because again, PTSD, what was it, the 50s? It's not PTSD, you're not a man.
Nobody's talking about it in 1959.
Yeah, if you're coming home from war and it's affecting you, you're not a man. You're a lunatic. You're taking it out on people.
That's so weird that you say it, because I honestly, I never put that together, which sounds really dumb now. I just played it up. Like, again, I think I was caught up, like, watching it as a youngster, and the reaction of the guy at the junkyard, his dad's a fucking lunatic. I just thought his dad was a lunatic. It never kind of dawned on me the fact that, which, again, it seems quite embarrassing now, that his father was probably suffering from PTSD because he stormed the beach at Normandy. But yeah, it's a great point. And I think it's like that scene in particular perfectly encapsulates the tone of this movie, because when you look back at it, the things you pick out are the fun stuff.
Yeah,
it's the little moments that you have. It's the handful of set pieces. It's the time you have with your friends, and of course that scene is like, as I said at the top of the podcast, like what he said was chopper sick. What I heard was chopper sick balls.
Yeah.
And of course they're all having fun. He escapes. They've got one over on the junkyard. It's the whole thing about myth against reality when they see the dog. And, I remember that scene being funny. We've quoted it so many times. It's like, "Oh, I'll be telling all your fathers about this, except for the loony up in Togus." And of course, he like immediately goes full Corey Feldman. "I'll rip off your neck and your head and shit down your neck." But then, and it's still kind of funny then and entertaining, but then it gets really sad really quick. Like it's not just, this old guy has said something about his dad. Like, you see immediately, it's like, it's really hurting to hear that.
When he's crying, as Chris is dragging him away and he's crying, he's still saying, "He stormed the beach at Normandy." Like, that's all he can, like, that to him. It doesn't matter what his dad did, because his dad helped to win the war. And it's pretty much the same with Chris as well, isn't it? I mean, his backstory's hinted at. And to him, he is only ever going to be Eyeball Chambers' brother. So everyone just looks down at him anyway as a criminal before they even get to know him. I mean, he did steal the milk money, but he gave it back.
Yeah. Well, he's got, like, as you said, that whole thing about, is it the person you are, or are you acting as the person people expect you to be? But he's the link. Obviously, his brother is Eyeball Chambers, but the real threat is Ace. And it's great because obviously this is, previously mentioned, a Stephen King novella, and it doesn't have a traditional monster. But, what is the most realistic monster to a 12-year-old boy than an older bully? And there is no better bully than Kiefer Sutherland's Ace in this film, because not only does he have the fact that he can pull off a name like Ace, because Kiefer Sutherland was just inherently cool, even when he was being a douche. Like, he's definitely got a hint of David the vampire from Lost Boys in this.
Yeah.
But
And this was a year before Lost Boys, wasn't it? This is
it
86,
was, yeah. 86, yeah. But you believe him, like, not only is he's an older bully, but imagine if you're a 12-year-old kid, there's an older bully, and your older brother is clearly scared of him. So if your older brother is scared of him, you're going to be shit scared of him. And it's because you have that, and it's something Kiefer Sutherland sells so well in this film, is the idea that he might do anything. Like, he might not just beat you up, he might fucking stab you.
Well, he pulls it off so well because he is so handsome. He is handsome in this. He's fresh faced.
He totally is.
He's fresh faced. I mean, he could be charming to the older generation. They probably in this, they're probably not. They probably know what kind of person he is. But if he wanted to be, I could probably think he could charm the older people. But then you look at him, as you say, towards the 12-year-old boys. He's so quick and easy to pull out his little flick knife and threaten you. But you honestly kind of think that you may push him too far one day and he will actually use it.
Yeah, it's like when he has Chris on the floor and he's going to put the cigarette in his eyes. And it's always that sign in these films. Like, he's a bully in a group full of bullies, but he's clearly the ringleader, dragging out. Everyone else is too scared to say no. But even their friends like, all right, Ace, you're going too far. Like, that's enough. He's the one who's, like, even the other ones, all the older kids are assholes. But even they're saying, like, dude, man, he's pushing this too far. Like, he's kind of the loose cannon.
When Eyeball tries to step up at the end and says, come on, Ace. And he shuts Eyeball down straight away. It's like, nah. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, they're all doing exactly.
You're going to watch me do something bad to your brother, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, yeah. And, you see it. And I've seen, like, those groups of friends. Again, it's something people can relate to. It's like you have this group of friends and you know that all of their actions are driven by this one kid who's bigger, who's stronger. And in fairness, he's not massive in this film, but he's just a psycho and nobody wants any trouble with him. And it's even it's the scene when they're, like, knocking down the post boxes with the baseball bat. And it's like, do they want to keep doing this? Like, everything Ace says goes. It's like, well, I want to do this, so you're fucking doing it. And it's just like, oh,
how
whatever.
Much do you want to bet that he doesn't have a razor blade Cobra's tattoo?
Yeah.
But he's made everyone else in the gang have it.
Do you know it's like, if he says, this is what happened, it comes back to the idea again. It's like, everyone's too scared to go contrary to Ace. So he just drags everyone along. It's like, are the other kids in the group that bad? Maybe not, but they can't back down because they hang around with Ace.
And it's kind of like marking it as well. And I do think it's really interesting that he probably doesn't have a Cobra scar tattoo, but he's making all the others get it. And it's another one of those power trips, controlling. And it's really like from supposedly he would be 17, 18 then. Yeah, meant to be, because obviously driving. So it's really good to see how. I say good to see it. It's still alarming how they're all being controlled, and I guess it's the small town mentality as well. If we're not going out, if we're not getting out of this town, then we'll follow this guy to wherever we want to do. And
I don't think the small town thing even matters, because, as I said, I think people can relate to this and people can see it. It's like, if you have a strong enough character in a group of friends, they will take over that group of friends. They will basically instill their sense of, I don't know, whatever, idealism on the rest of the group. And it just so happens that Ace is a complete shitbag and he's completely dominating his group of friends. And everyone's just too scared to react. And it's something that, like, Stephen King writes so well. I mean, again, it comes back to the idea
before you go on, this is really good as well, because you get the counterbalance to that of Chris, because, as you said, if you've got that strong personality, even Richard Dreyfuss, even he, when he's narrating, he's not making himself the leader. He says Chris was the leader of the gang. Chris was the guy we looked up to. Chris was the guy. So you've got the two tonally
yin and yang, for lack of a better term.
Exactly. And it's done really well. And sorry, I just wanted to lead into that.
No, that's a fantastic point. And as you said, like, that is, I never really considered that before, but that is exactly the case of Chris. He's the strong character in the group, but he allows if he was an asshole and he wanted to force his way of thinking upon his friends, he could. But because he's such a nice guy, everyone looks up to him, and he kind of dominates the group in his own way, but everyone looks up to him instead. Whereas with Ace, they don't look up to him, they're just scared of him. And that is the difference. But it's just something I think is so well written in this film, because they're not actually on screen all that much. It's like, yeah, it's this kind of threat, but it's this background threat, Ace. It's not this constant. I know they have the showdown at the end of the film, but it doesn't feel like it's all leading towards that. I never get that sense that they're rushing there against Ace, even if it is kind of suggested a few times. The journey really is their journey. It's not a ticking clock against Ace. It never feels like that. But when he's on screen, he's so convincing, so scary, for lack of a better term. That idea, when you were younger, the idea of running into a kid like this would be a nightmare. And even when you look back, you're like, Jesus Christ, I wouldn't have fancied that when I was, 12 years old. And I think it's something, it comes back to the whole, Stephen King thing. It's like, I'm convinced he must have been bullied as a child because he writes these characters so well. It's like Henry Bauer in It. He's another one, like an absolutely top-tier shitbag bully. And not just, he's a piece of work, like a scary bully again. It's like, oh my God, imagine having to deal with that in your life. And like, that would be a major issue.
The way he controls his three friends.
In
It.
It's a similar character.
Fear and manipulation.
100%. And I think, I don't think there's anything down which says, Stephen King was specifically bullied, but I think there was something about him having like a babysitter who was like a complete nightmare and used to like fart in his face or something. And maybe you've just taken that to like the next extreme to create this threat in the film. But it is interesting because that threat, and it does kind of all lead to the showdown at the end of the film, but it's not what the film is about. The film always comes back, and it is the same as the book, in fairness. It always comes back to the story is just about that journey. It's about them having this moment in their lives, and it's not just that moment unto itself, i.e. the day or two when they go and try and find the body, but just that kind of nostalgic looking back thing as well, where he's like, it was never the same after this. It's this like everything was leading towards this moment in my life, and I had this group of friends, and then it just kind of drifted away, as these friendships do. It's it's like, well, okay, we had this moment, this time in our lives which will inexorably kind of tie us together forever, whatever happened to the rest of their lives. And obviously it's different in the book to the film, but the idea that obviously Chris died and the other two just kind of, they went on to have normal lives, but they weren't the same friends again. It was like
Vern ended up being like a forklift operator, married with 2 kids, and Teddy is doing odd jobs around Castle Rock. So so they pretty much just stayed in their lane. What I do love, this is quintessentially the coming of age story.
100%.
Yeah, and what I love, the coming of age movie is sometimes hackneyed with characters learning valuable lessons from. You've got the wise old mentors, or they're doing it for love and everything like that. But I read something that said Stand By Me, the film adaptation of Stephen King's novella, is one of the most grounded and heartfelt examples of the genre ever made, and it is spot on.
It really is. It really is, because again, it comes back to the idea that nothing feels overblown. There are obviously little moments when I guess it's kind of like you can't directly relate to like almost being hit by a train in quite the same way, but it still feels something you could kind of be like, oh yeah, but there was that time on the train tracks when we were fucking around. And it's like, this film is ostensibly tied together by 3 or 4 set pieces. God, what are they? There's the junkyard, the train, then I'm doing this all in the wrong order, then firing the gun, which again, nothing big. They just fire a gun in the back of an alley at a can, but it sells you on the idea that at that moment in time, at that moment in their lives, this is the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
And that is what it was like, to be 12. It's like everything you do, these moments, it's all the first time you're doing it. And your little world is the most important thing in the world. It's before you get to that age when you're really looking outwards. So everything amongst you and your friends is the most important thing in the universe. And that's something this movie captures.
That scene, spot on nails as well, how Gordy looks at Chris.
Yeah, totally.
Because he's like, Gordy, I didn't know it was loaded. I 100% promise you I didn't know it was loaded. And Gordy's like, yeah, okay, like, I believe you. I will follow you. I believe you. Like, he could have been lying through his teeth at that point.
But you
don't get that feeling with Chris. You get that feeling with Chris that he's on it. Like, he's living a life, or he's dealing with the cards he was dealt, or playing the cards he was dealt. But to his friends, to the ones he cares about, he is honest and he is caring and trustworthy.
Yeah.
So,
the thing is, it even builds up those in moments like that. Like, of course, you've got these 4 friends and they're the best of friends, But even in that, and again, it's something I think most people can relate to, is even amongst that group, you still have those special relationships, even amongst that special relationship of friends. And it goes, and it's for both of them as well. The obvious one, obviously, is Chris and Gordy, and they have that special bond. But you also see those little hints about the way they go off. That Teddy and Vern have that, and I'm not sure if that's forced upon them because they can see that they're never going to have the same relationship with Gordy or Chris that Gordy and Chris have with each other. Like they just got that bond. But you see it as well, like Vern and Teddy, and I think it was no surprise that they because in the book, I think all three of them die before they're 30. Gordy's the only one who survives. But I like the fact that in the film, they're just like, yeah, well, those two, they just went off and lived their lives. And I think that thematically works better in the film. The idea that Gordy was the one with the talent and could have gone on to do something special. Chris maybe had something special, but was always tied down to his circumstances. And that Vern and Teddy were always just going to stay in Castle Rock. They were always just going to, they were almost destined to drift away from Gordy. Yeah. Like, they were like, they had this moment. And even then, it's kind of almost like they all knew, it's like, we're not going to be best friends 10, 20 years from now. This is just a moment. And, it's like later on in life, you end up choosing your friends to a certain extent, I suppose. But when you're younger, you do have that unique moment in time when you're forced upon each other by circumstances. Well, we were friends when we were 5, so I guess we're still friends when we're 15.
What did he say at the end, though, didn't he? He said, even in high school, like they just became faces in the hall.
Yeah, and it happens.
So exactly. And that's what's really good about it. And I love how they meet their characters so well. Like we've just said, Chris is the leader already. His best friend is definitely Gordy. I mean, they're all best friends together at this point, but those two are the best friends. Vern is the guy that you've let into the group. He's the comic relief, per se. He's the guy you let. Teddy's... why you would let Teddy into the group, it's probably like feel sorry for him at some point because of things that's happened. But then he has that kind of antagonistic relationship as well with Gordy.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of Gordy screwed the pooch, Gordy, you lose. And all those kind of things. So they nail their parts really well. And the sum of... I can't remember the quotes. The sum of all parts makes... I can't remember that quote.
Yeah, I know you're getting at, yeah.
And it works. It's an individual cog that makes the machine work really well. For that group, those 4 guys, I really enjoy the way they bounce off each other in this film.
Yeah, and it comes back to the idea again that you have this unique almost group of friends when you're younger, in so much that, you can see... It's like, why is Gordy hanging around with Teddy? Why is he hanging around with it? Like, they seem kind of diametrically opposed in so many aspects of their lives. But that is the thing of when you have these friends at a really young age, there's no big decision making as to who's your best friend. It's almost like, who did you start talking to first in primary school? Who was the other kid you were sitting next to and had that first conversation? You're just like, well, I guess we'll be best friends for the next 5, 10. And obviously for some, I'm lucky enough that I've got a group of friends who I was friends with when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and somehow our friendship has stood the test of time, and we're still friends when we're at our late 30s. But I think for a lot of people, and it's something I can kind of allude to, speak to as well, is like there are people where for this short period of time you have these like intense friendships built around circumstances. But then it's just they drift away, and there's no reading the riot act, there's no falling out. You just become different people. You do different things. And as you say, that great quote, they're just faces in the hallway. There's not, oh God, remember we fell out and that's why we're not friends. It's like, no, that didn't happen. We just gently drifted apart as our lives kind of went in subtly different directions.
It was obviously, the woodworking, as they called it, and the college courses probably didn't mesh. So they just became faces and then never had time for each other. And it does happen. You do grow up. I mean, you personally, as you said, you've been lucky enough to be friends since you were 4 or 5. You know what I mean? I'm lucky enough to still have close friendships with a couple of the guys from my school, but my friendships drifted to the older generation. So like I made my best friends now I met when I was in my 20s. So it kind of...
Yeah, but the reason this film works is regardless of whether you're still friends with, those kids you hung around with when you're 12, you can still remember that. And that is the thing, regardless of whether you're still friends with them in your 40s or whether they're just this distant memory, they are a memory, and they're an important memory, and they will always, regardless of whether you fell out or whether you just drifted apart, you end up different people, regardless of whether you think they're assholes now, you always have that, like, they were important parts of an incredibly important part of your life. When, as I said, that idea again, that everything you did at that age felt so important, and they were a big part of that.
Yeah, because they're a blueprint. They're part of the blueprint of your life.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. So I mean, you wouldn't be who you are without the people that you knew.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's what the narrator Richard Dreyfuss shows on this. I'm going to say his name different every time I say it.
I think you should. Yeah. I don't know. He's very good in this, by the way. Like, his voice just suits the part.
His voice.
I can't even say Jerry O'Connell right. Did I say it right that time?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Chris O'Donnell. Yeah.
Chris O'Donnell. Jesus Christ. So yeah, Richard. I think you mispronouncing Richard Dreyfuss each time. I think you're going to be fine.
Yeah. You mentioned you said 4 set pieces, but you only said 3. Is the other set piece the one thing we haven't actually talked about at the moment? That's got to be Bathorama, yeah?
Yeah, the fighting content. Yeah, because it's weird. It's almost like a completely superfluous set piece, which has nothing to do with the characters other than to tell you that, like, what Gordy's talent is.
Yeah.
And obviously to kind of tie it into the whole Stephen King thing again. And maybe even sneak in, like, at the end of the story when Teddy is like, wait, so what happened to Lardas? He's like, I don't know. And I think it's like a critique on, people, like, it doesn't matter what you write, there's always going to be people upset with your work.
Because that's famous what Stephen King is famous for. People don't like his endings.
Yeah. And it's great that it's written. It's almost like, did Teddy grow up to be Kathy Bates in Misery? One of those. But no, it's such a weird scene because it's completely unnecessary in so many respects, but it's so memorable. And I think it's, again, when you're younger, it just ticks all the boxes. It's a revenge story. It's gross. It's funny. It's like, there's a reason we all remember the Bathorama story with Lardas.
Being a husky gentleman, it's good to see the larger lad, shall we say,
coming out on top.
Get some sort of revenge, yes.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those, like, that scene shouldn't work, like, with everybody puking. in a film which is otherwise pretty heartfelt, and then you suddenly just got this random cutaway to a story where a guy eats so many pies and he drinks castor oil and raw eggs so that he puked, and everybody puked. But it works. And I think it speaks to the quality of the direction from Rob Reiner, as somebody who's, I mean, we'll get into the Rob Reiner run in the 80s in a bit, but goddamn, man, this guy was on fire.
Stomach. Because if you drank 1.5 liters of castor oil and then downed a couple of raw eggs, you ain't making it onto stage.
He's done well to make it.
And to eat about 4 or 5 pies. I would be puking up as soon as that stuff...
that's the power of revenge. The power of revenge. He was able to hold it down because he's like, I'm having my moments. And what a fucking moment to have. But yeah, that is what I consider one of the key set pieces of the films. And it's, I think we've already mentioned it to a certain extent, but obviously the train scene, it's beautifully shot and it's dramatic. But again, they're all just the right side of relatable. Like, that's probably the biggest one, when they're just like, like when you're watching it and Vern is crawling, you're like, you're gonna die because Vern's a coward and he will not get up and fucking run.
No, when he was crawling, you kind of just on the edge of your seat when he decides to just give up and get back down. And then you've got Will Wheaton just screaming behind him, "We're gonna fucking die!" Like,
Will Wheaton's great in that scene because the panic. In the panic and rage, like, get the fuck, like, he didn't say get the fuck up. Yeah. You know what I mean? That idea is just like, dude, if you don't get up, we are both going to die. And he, he's a nice kid. He can't leave Vern behind. No. So he has to get him up. And it's like, there's no talking to him. It's just screaming panic. And I think that scene, with no CG, the way it's shot, obviously it's all to do with perspective. Yeah. But so much of it is sold on, I think, Will Wheaton's response to Vern's cowardice. And then, of course, the like, watching, even after that, Vern like waddle down the tracks, and just the panic,
the crying
on
run.
Gordy's, and Gordy being stuck behind him. Like, dude, just please run faster. We're gonna get hit by a train.
Watching it now again, seeing like that is fantastic acting. The crying run as he's running, he is great. Terrified. Like Vern is clearly in panic. He's gonna die in his mind. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think the better panic acting is actually Will Wheaton, because I think he's the one behind. I think he's the one who's like aware of the situation. Like, it's almost like Vern is shut down. Like you said, the bit when he goes down and just hugs it, he doesn't know what to do. He's just in total kind of like, he's almost, like you said, shut down. Whereas Gordy is fully aware of the situation and he's trying to convey this to Vern. It's like, dude, if you don't get moving, we're going to get squished by this oncoming train.
How sweet and innocent is Vern's response to, I lost the comb.
I love that.
Oh my God.
That's one of those, like, Vern has maybe the two of the kind of key, like, you know, like moments from films which almost become part of your lexicon growing up.
Yeah.
It's like the two things, for me, I think at least, the things that stick with me are the Goocher. It's like, you know, if you're for some reason we're flipping coins, like, oh, dude, that's a Goocher, that's bad news. And the other one is like when they've all like, oh, how much money have you got for the shop? And everyone's got like a couple of kids. And there's always that one kid who brought the comb, which is basically shorthand now for I brought fuck all.
I do love it as well. When they're in the morning, they're walking the train tracks in the morning and their faces are covered in chocolate. Like, what they've eaten, I don't know, but it's just all over their face instead of in their mouth. And then Vern goes, geez, couldn't you go breakfast stuff? Sorry, Vern, I couldn't get it off for your 7 cents.
Yeah. And that is the thing. Vern, he's like the lowest key character of the bunch. There's just no two ways about it. But he's still, like you say, you need that comedy relief. Yeah. Like, it's almost like, I think it would have been too much if Vern had a tragic, you know, family backstory as well. You just need Vern to be the comedy relief, you know, just that, like, add that lighthearted sense.
Well, your first introduction of him, is, I forgot the knock.
Yeah.
I forgot the secret knock.
He's a charming idiot, basically.
What I do love, like, do you think as well that there was actually more in the gang, but they're just not available that weekend? The only reason I ask is because all three of them are playing cards. They're playing that knock card game. Then Vern comes along, knocks, and they go, that's not the secret knock. And he goes, I forgot it. And they all go, Vern.
Yeah.
Like, if there's only 4 of you in that gang, and you're already all up there, you know who's knocking the door.
Yeah, I think it's just like a boys' club thing. I think it's just the 4 of them. What's that one? That's that great scene where Teddy gets, it's like, you ain't got that, you piece of shit. It's like, a pile of shit. It's like, a pile of shit has 1,000 eyes. I mean, I've never heard that before or since. Why does a pile of shit have 1,000 eyes?
When they're smoking the cigarette at the camp out, and he goes, I cherish these moments.
Like a 50-year-old man. Yeah. But it is weird because, you know, you have those set pieces, and it's all, I mean, you know, really, the whole story is gearing towards them finding a dead body. And again, that magic of capturing what, to them at least, appears to be a kind of, it's an adventure you go with your friends. You know, that peer pressure. Like, someone's like, oh, dude, you know, do you want to see a dead body? And it's like, as a group of young boys, you can't say no. You have to say, yeah, you know, one of the guys says yes, everyone says yes, you're all in, you've all got to do it. And it's like they forget about really what they're doing, or the reality of what they're actually doing is kind of lost upon them.
They get closer to it as well. That's what's
it's like, like finding a dead body should be a macabre story, but it's anything but. And I think it, like, that highlights their innocence. I mean, you know, like that idea that you just can't back down. It's just like, we're just going out on a walk with our friends, like a bit of an adventure, until like the reality of it kicks in. Like when they show up, and I think there's that famous line, it's like when they see him for the first time, it's like, the kid wasn't sick, the kid wasn't sleeping, the kid was dead.
Yeah.
And it's like the tone immediately like changes. Like, you know, they all knew what they were going to go see, but I don't think any of them knew what it meant.
But it's all of them. Ace's, the Cobras and Gordy's gang, all go in there just so they could be in the paper or be on the radio.
Yeah. Like the glory of it.
Yeah, so that was it. That was the whole motivation for finding the dead body, was we want to be the famous ones.
And I think for some of the younger kids, the main group, I'm not even sure if they had thought that far ahead. I think they were just like, well, I'm just going on an adventure with my friend. Obviously, for Ace and stuff, that was very much it. It was like the potential money and stuff, and it becomes something more. And especially for obviously Gordy and Chris, it's the journey to get there has become so important that it can't be tarnished now by kind of almost cheapening it. Like, it's almost like this kid, the kid who died, it's like he's almost brought us here. He's brought us on this journey together, and obviously something important has happened to them. And you do get that great face-off then with Ace and the guys, and that's one of the major differences between the book and the movie. Is in the book, it's actually Chris who's holding the gun on Ace.
Yeah.
But in the movie, I think I think it was a wise choice. They moved it to Gordy, and I think thematically for the story, I think it works in the book just fine. But I think for the movie, it makes more sense that it's Gordy. And I think it's more important that it's Gordy who stands up.
It gives Gordy that realism that I can actually move forward. I can stand up for myself. I can go and be who I want to be. And then once they all go, once Ace says, "We'll never forget this. Do you think this is over?" Mm-hmm. And then Gordy kind of steps up. Then he goes, "Yeah, we're not moving in. We're not doing anything. We're going home. We'll call the police." Yeah. And he steps up. Then he takes a bit of a leadership role, and Chris is just like, "Yeah, we'll do like whatever you want." Yeah.
Well, it's the perfect I can't get the word out, but the perfect example of the journey rather than the destination.
Yes, yeah,
it's absolutely. Like they get there, and of course they're acting wise beyond their years. Like they get there, and it's like, listen, it's not about the body. It's not about like getting our faces in the paper or anything like that. It's that obviously that's what's brought us here, but the important thing was us getting here and what's happened on the way there. But and of course, like one of those, again, that moment of loss of innocence. It's like suddenly you see something and it just changes your perspective on it. It's like, you can hear about it. You can say, you can say to them, do you want to see a dead body? But until you see it, and I mean, if I was going to be quite crass as a comparison in my own life, when I went to Amsterdam, two of the guys I was with, they were going in and seeing, would you call it a peep show? When you go into one of those horrendous little boxes and people are in the middle, like a girl's in the middle doing stuff. Yeah. And I was just outside. I was like, I didn't really I'd seen, I'd gone in and seen one. And honest to God, I was like, all right, that feels like enough. There was a girl in the middle. She was doing stuff. I was like, I'm in Amsterdam, when in Rome, or when in Amsterdam. I was like, but they were like, all right, we're going back in. And I was like, I don't need to go back. I was like, I've seen it. That was enough.
You've seen one, you've seen them all.
Yeah, a bit gross. So I was outside having a cigarette. And the guys came out and they said, you've got to go back in. And I was like, why? And they go, they're having sex. Because before it was just a woman just playing with herself, whatever. And I was like, okay. I was like, I was suddenly, it suddenly told me, I was like, I had never seen two like other people ever having sex. And it was something like, I suddenly went in that box and it was like, I knew I was going in to see a guy having sex with a woman. But then when you went in, it's like, man, that is a dude fucking a woman right in front of me. And it was just a weird moment. Like it just changed me. I was just like, man, I'm not sure if I need to be seeing another dude fucking a chick like right in front of me. It just seemed weird.
The whole tone of this podcast just took a right hand turn.
It really did. It's not, I appreciate it's not a perfect kind of analogy or kind of comparison point to these boys going on these life-changing adventures and finding a body in the world. But that was the closest thing I had as an adult, was actually seeing a random dude fucking a woman right in front of me. I was like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'm not sure if I had an epiphany in quite the same way, but it definitely had an effect on me, that's for sure.
Mine was actually teaming up with a bunch of friends to go and find a dead body.
Oh, was it exactly that? Yeah. Oh, fair enough.
No, it was an animal.
Oh, you actually went to try and find it?
Yeah, so it wasn't like, it was a dead cow, I think, randomly in one of the fields.
But that is the thing, though, isn't it? It's like, most of us haven't got a story. Obviously, I don't, with my weird sex story from Amsterdam, but about going to find a dead body. But like, jokes aside, most of us have these like adventure stories from when we were younger.
What I already said, like, in the summer, you would go out and then come back when the streetlights turned on, and nobody heard from you. You'd be gone.
Oh, once you were out the door, you were gone.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
I think we're doing a disservice to the dead body without naming it or naming him. It was Ray Brower, wasn't it?
Yeah, Ray Brower. Yeah,
played by Chris O'Donnell.
Chris O'Donnell, yeah, that's the one. That was the one. Actually, I knew he was in this fucking film. But yeah, I mean, he does have a name, but I mean, the name of the book is The Body. It's again, and that is, I think it speaks to the idea that for most of this film, it is just a body. And it's only at that very final moment that it becomes a person. It becomes Ray Brower.
As you've already alluded to, and you haven't alluded to, you actually said it. When they said he's not sick, he's not ill,
sleeping, he's dead.
Dead, yeah,
and the reality kicks in. But yeah, I mean, and that's pretty much it for the film. You know, it is relatively low key for the most part, despite everything we've talked about, kind of
and
thing.
87 minutes long. I know.
I was another one of those 80s films when you go back and watch it. Like, if you said how long is this film, I would have sworn it was like 110 minutes. But yeah, like super short. It's like a tight movie. No fat on the bones. Is that right? No fat on the bones. I don't know if that's a saying or if I'm just making it up. But needless to say, like, it clips along at a hell of a pace, considering it's a movie about our kids just walking, ostensibly. But it really is a great film, and a big part of that obviously is the cast, but it's also
the soundtrack,
the director.
Oh, okay,
soundtrack. But we'll get to the soundtrack.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought that's where we were going, but we'll go.
But Rob Reiner, somebody who's like, I don't say gone off the rails, but he hasn't made, I think, a movie which, you know, anybody feels especially attached to, maybe since, you know, the early 90s. But he was in the midst here of an unbelievable run. So in 84, he did Spinal Tap. In 85, he did The Sure Thing. In 86, he did Stand By Me. In 87, he did The Princess Bride. In 88, I can only assume he took off a year to count all of his money. In 89, he did When Harry Met Sally. In 1990, he did another Stephen King adaptation, Misery. And 91, he has another year off. And in 92, he does A Few Good Men. Now, that is an all-time run of movies. That is unfucking believable. And it's like his career. In 94, then, he makes North with Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis and Elijah Wood. That is, that is a film.
And it seems to have just like derailed his directing career. He's never quite on form again. And you just think, considering that run for what, like 7 years or 8 years of just nothing but net, and then North happens and it just derails everything. But I don't think it matters, because off the back of the success of this movie, he actually created Castle Rock Productions, named after the fictional town in Oregon where this is based. And I mean, that's part of Warner Media now. That's gone on to be a part of any number of absolutely gigantic movies. So, Rob Reiner's not short of money, put it that way. And I think a lot of his success always comes back to I
will say, as a kid, when I watched North, I enjoyed it.
Oh dear God!
I was 10, mind.
Yeah, I'm sure you enjoyed sticking stuff up your fucking nose as well. North is a piece of shit, dude.
No, because I went back and rewatched North. I thought, I enjoyed this as a kid. I'll watch it again. Oh my God, it's bad.
That's always interesting, isn't it? When you get those films, when it's like you hear, like you suddenly get older, you read the reviews, you're like, man, this film has been torn to pieces. It's like, I remember loving this film. And then you go back and rewatch it and the horror sets in and go, oh yeah, when I was 10, I was a moron. It's like, Jesus Christ. Although saying that, it's like, for the most part, you know, and I think the podcast speaks to this. I think we both had pretty decent taste in movies when we were younger.
But there was always those few.
There was always a North or a
Van Damme's Cyborg is probably one that you don't want to.
Cyborg's a great example, because I do like I think you can go back and like. I went back and watched Bloodsport and Kickboxer not too long ago. And there's a charm to them. They're not great movies, but they're charming. And I can still understand why I like them. I went back and watched Cyborg a few years ago.
I know.
Wow. Yeah. Cyborg I love that film. I fucking love Cyborg. It's a piece of shit.
I know what's wrong. I know this isn't the Cyborg podcast, but what's nuts about it was actually a script to be Masters of the Universe 2.
Which is insane. And I just love the fact that we had to explain. Just be clear, this isn't a Cyborg podcast. Like, I wonder if anyone's actually done a podcast. Somebody must have done a podcast on Cyborg.
Cyborg was 1989, so we will be covering it on this podcast someday soon.
Well, I do wonder at some point if we are going to get into those movies, the ones where, like Cyborg, Robot Jocks is another one we've mentioned a few times. The ones which we know are ostensibly bad, but they have these special places in our hearts, but I think it kind of defeats the object.
I'm going to say it coming soon.
We know they don't hold up. No, you can't be
coming soon. Buckaroo Banzai.
Well, that is going to be an interesting one because I've only seen the trailer and I didn't know anything about that film growing up. And yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. But like, I do think films like Cyborg and Saint North, for instance, defeat the point because the whole point of this podcast is going back and asking ourselves, do these films hold up? Yeah. We know Cyborg doesn't hold up. We don't need to rewatch it again. Like, let's not put ourselves through that. But
let's move on to the fantastic soundtrack.
Oh, I want to go there next. Yeah, sure.
Is that right?
No, go for it. I mean, obviously, like Benny King's song. I mean,
which is interesting because obviously Benny King's song was 1961 when it was released. And
61.
59. So that's
I think I think actually the book might have actually even been set in 1960, but it's still not 61. So yeah, it is. But it doesn't matter because the book didn't have Stand By Me in the soundtrack to the book. It was very much like, we've got the title, we're going to put it in regardless. And you can see why they did it. And I'm sure everybody forgives them for that kind of chronological lapse. Because is it a bit on the nose? Yes. Does it fucking work? 100%. Well, 100%.
It was re-released, wasn't it? With a new music video that had the kids as well. I remember that music.
Yeah.
And I think it did better on the re-release because of the film.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
And then what else did you have? Rockin' Robin, Great Balls of Fire, Lollipop, obviously.
Yeah.
One of my favourite songs of all time, Buddy Holly's Every Day. I absolutely loved this soundtrack. Because
it's a great
that my nan and my mum and my grandparents, my mum and my dad would listen to. Kind of thing. So it's stuff that I grew up listening to as well, and it's
strange that you say that because I don't have any association with it. But what it does do, and it works so well for the film, is create that perfect sense of late 50s Americana, which this film is so linked to. With the fashion, the cars, and everything. They do lean into that to a certain extent, and a big part of that for me is even though I don't have any connection to those songs growing up, to me, they're perfect representations of Americana. And when I do think of classic Americana, I do still think of the 50s, of like almost the height of America.
You got the drive-ins, the rock and roll.
Yeah, 100%. The things that really, from a pop culture perspective, cemented what America would become.
Yeah.
Because obviously, it would have had pop culture beforehand, but it was really after this quote unquote success and how America came out of World War II that it really became this global force. And you're getting those first hints of globalization and the first hints of, again, very much from a pop culture perspective, the United States finding its identity and essentially sharing it with the world. And when I do think of Americana, I do come back to those classic 50s tropes, things again with the soundtrack, with the look, are all caught absolutely beautifully in this film.
With the soundtrack as well, we'd be remiss to not go back, and because we did it as kids, your favorite TV show, you're singing the theme tune to it and all, and they're doing it as they're traveling along, they're all singing the theme tune to Have Gun Will Travel.
Yeah.
Totally. And we've done it. I mean, I've probably growing up in the 80s and 90s is humming the theme tune to the A-Team.
Yeah, or Mask, or some ridiculous cartoon.
Yeah. So we've also that's another thing that will links you to this film and gives you that nostalgic effect as well. So it's
it just really good, it's not the same as you, but it's something you can immediately attach yourself to. You can put yourself in that position. You can say, well, I would have done that and it would have been a different song, but we still would have done essentially the same thing.
You asked me before I watched this film, okay, maybe not before I watched this film, but if you asked me a couple of years ago, I probably wouldn't have told you what Have Gun Will Travel was. But now I can, do you know what I mean? So it's
totally.
Yeah.
No, totally. And as you say, and obviously the soundtrack is, it sets the film and obviously gives you that sense of time and place to a certain extent. But also, I'm not sure, and of course it helps that the movie goes by the same name, if any song in here, other than maybe Ghostbusters, but that was created for the film. Considering the song was released, 25 years before the film was released.
Yeah.
It's so linked to the film. Like if you hear Stand By Me, the song, and I think it's the same for pretty much everyone, you immediately think of the film. You immediately see the characters in your head. You don't even see, and maybe it's a generational thing, but you don't think Benny King. You think the movie. I just think the movie.
You would be forgiven to link it straight to the film and just totally bypass the fact that it's an older song.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. In terms of, do you want to see Legacy next or video game or Fact? Sorry.
Let's go Legacy.
Legacy. Well, it's a bit of an interesting one, and again, this is a dangerous road to go down because we're big Stephen King fans. But obviously, there were no sequels and stuff. But when I think of the legacy of this film, the first thing that pops into my mind is you think of how many adaptations there have been of Stephen King's work,
of the novella alone.
Of that one novella. I mean, this was The Body was part of a novella called the 4 Different Seasons.
Yes.
And 3 of the 4 of them have been turned into films. There's At Pupil, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, The Body, which is obviously Stand By Me, and The Breathing Method, which is unbelievably going to be turned into a film. Just be clear, I give you a quick rundown. This is about a woman, a surprisingly, actually, touching tale of a decapitated woman managing to give birth to a son, which on paper works better than that overview or synopsis would suggest. But as to how that'll work on screen, I have no idea.
Yeah, but this is also from a man that has written such random stuff that gets turned into films. I mean, Thinner, for a start.
Yeah, that's pretty mental. But even that, I don't know how you make, again, especially capturing the tone of that woman giving birth while she's decapitated. It's not a funny story. I don't know how that's going to work. But the point is, At Pupil is, in terms of, successes, I mean, adaptations of Stephen King novels range from the exemplary to the absolutely dire.
Yeah.
And the fact that Different Seasons has 3 really, At Pupil is actually a pretty good adaptation. Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, you could make an argument for being the best.
And it's quite possibly one of the best adaptations going, not just of a Stephen King book.
Well, a lot of people would make an argument it's one of the best films, full stop. Yeah. I mean, the IMDb chart, it's often right at the very top, up there with Godfather.
It's such a fantastic film.
And that is the thing, when I think of this film, I can't help but think, how highly does this rank in the list of great Stephen King adaptations? So the obvious ones that jump out for me are The Shining with Stanley Kubrick. There's the Frank Darabont trilogy of Shawshank Redemption, The Mist, and The Green Mile, all of which are absolutely fantastic. And then the other ones, like the ones that jump out for me, It, very much part 1, part 2, I thought was a massive disappointment. Carrie, Misery, The Dead Zone, The Running Man, which is arguably a Richard Bachman book, and I think it's an interesting one because I don't think most people know that Running Man is a Stephen King adaptation. Again, maybe it is the Richard Bachman thing, but I was like, I think Stand By Me is up there in the very top tier. I think it's alongside The Shining and arguably Shawshank Redemption as the kind of top 3 Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah. They're doing another.
And I think that's his greatest legacy.
They're doing another Richard Bachman film, aren't they? The Long Walk, which
I love that.
Is a fantastic book.
That is really good. Yeah, that is cinematic. That is something. Yeah. I remember as I read it, because I only read it for the first time a few years ago, and that is as you're reading it, you can paint such a vivid picture of the story as it goes, and you can imagine it on screen.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe not so much with The Breathing Method, but the interesting thing is, I think the most successful ones, other than maybe Shawshank, which other than Red being Ginger Irishman rather than being Morgan Freeman, is The Shining. Obviously, is famous for it with Kubrick, but the Stand By Me to a certain extent. These are the films which take the core tone of the books. And they're even telling the same story to large extent, but they know when to make those changes, to know when it's like, okay, this works brilliantly on the page, but it's not going to work on screen. And, we all know famously that Stephen King wasn't a fan of Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. He was obviously wrong and on far too much cocaine. But that film, for instance, like it took away all the papyri stuff and the stuff which wouldn't work on screen. It worked on paper, but he knew when to put the brakes on and be like, no, this isn't going to work on the screen.
Well, it's proof, isn't it? Because they did then that made-for-TV adaptation with Rebecca De Mornay, The Shining, which stuck to the book, and that wasn't the best, shall we say?
No, the best adaptations often know when to step away from the source material, or to make those subtle changes, or to remove stuff. It's like in It. Like, it bizarrely works on the page, but
I know exactly where you're going, and I'm so glad that they skipped the group sex part.
Yeah, with the underage kids. But again, of course, you can make an argument that, nowadays it's pretty ropey, but it just about works on the page. I remember thinking it was weird, but on the page, because they can explain the feelings around it and the mentality, you can kind of make it work. But on screen, it's just a bunch of underage kids fucking. It would just be the worst. And I mean, that is the most extreme example of it, of course. But there are choices made throughout these films where they've just gone, okay, let's. And I think a perfect example is Doctor Sleep, the sequel to The Shining, where the movie, which is a decent enough movie, but it's much more slavish in its kind of interpretation of the book, I think. It's much truer to the book. And I think something is lost there, especially towards the ending, something which the original The Shining nails. That's arguably the biggest difference between the book and the movie, is how the book ends compared to how the movie ends. And I think they're both fantastic in and of themselves. But I think for the movie, for it to work on screen, it had to be different. It had to be different.
For me, it's the hobbling scene in Misery.
Oh, yeah.
In the book, it is, oh my God, it's much worse in the book than it is in the film.
I wonder, though, would it have, as gross as it was, you think of all the gross stuff you've seen on screen, it immediately kind of, it would arguably exaggerate it into the kind of gore horror kind of element, if you see what I mean. But because in the movie, there's something about the way she breaks his ankles and you visibly see it. Yeah. I somehow think it's worse than if she had gone to town on him with a chainsaw.
Well, she chops his foot off with an axe, doesn't she?
It's an axe, sorry, I thought it was a chainsaw, yeah. But I actually think the sledgehammer on the ankle is actually more effective on screen. I think
because you see it, the way you see it just... we've all seen limbs. We've all seen limbs taken off in films.
Yeah.
But to just see the ankle go away, the foot go away from the ankle as she just hobbles there. Yeah, exactly.
It's something about it's kind of like, remember when we did the Aliens podcast, and when I was growing up, it wasn't the alien tearing through someone's chest which got me. It was the dream sequence where you saw Ripley's skin stretching and it almost going, and it was something about that instead. And it was the same with Misery. I'm not sure if it would have had the same effect if she had lobbed off his... I've seen it in a bunch of horror films, people's limbs getting popped off, and it suddenly becomes maybe arguably cartoonish, but the brutality of that goddamn sledgehammer. Oh my fucking God. But yeah, anyway...
Further to that, talk about Stephen King forever, so I think we
I will get back on point. But the legacy of this movie does pop up in strange places. The most obvious one is Boys in the Hood, where John Singleton, the director, actually says, he's not subtle about it. It had a huge impact on his life. And obviously, at this point, when he was directing Boys in the Hood in the very early 90s, or was it 91, Boys in the Hood? It was very
was it?
Something like that, anyway. But, it's like Stand By Me was still pretty fresh in the mind. And there's a scene where there's 4 kids, there's that flashback to when they're kids, and he literally says, do you want to see a dead body? They literally walk down a train track. And then at the end of the film, at the end of the sequence, when 2 of the kids walk away, they kind of fade away, just like Vern and Teddy do at the end of Stand By Me. I mean, it's on the nose, but it totally works for that film.
It was 91, by the way.
91, yeah. But one of the more interesting ones, and I think maybe the reason I love this game so much, is the use of Stand By Me in Final Fantasy 15, where that film that game has faults, but maybe it's because of this reason. It is one of my favorite games of all time. And it opens with Stand By Me playing, and it's 4 guys. And essentially, they're going on an adventure. It's just the 4 of them. They're in a car. I've
seen that cinematic. Yeah.
And I remember that opening sequence, and it just had me at hello. Just one of those, I was in at the start of that game, and I absolutely adore it. And I loved, yes, again, is it a bit on the nose? It is. Was it effective? 100%. The only other thing in terms of real world is Brownsville, Oregon, where a lot of the film was actually filmed, because obviously Castle Rock is fictional, has had a Stand By Me day since 2007. I'm not sure what took them so long to wait until 2007. In 2010, on their 25th anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the film, as it were, a lot of the cast and the crew came there for a Q&A session. They even had an amateur pie eating contest, which I thought was pretty cool. So there is a Stand By Me day going on in Brownsville, Oregon, in case you ever want to visit.
It's it's interesting as well, isn't it? Because obviously with Stephen King, Castle Rock is Maine.
Yes.
For this one, it's Castle Rock, Oregon.
Yeah. In the book, it's not called Castle Rock, is it? It's something. Oh, what the hell's it called? I can't remember. But yeah, it's interesting. I think just to have that Stephen King connection, to have it named as Castle Rock, despite the fact that geographically it's in the completely wrong part of the country. But
do you want to cover facts, or do you want to go video games next?
I'll do video games quickly if I've got them here. I mean, obviously there wasn't a video game, but in terms of, I was trying to have a think of what I'd want to see in a Stand By Me video game, and I was like, I'm not sure if I want a Stand By Me video game specifically, but I was like thinking about something that would capture the tone. And obviously in recent years, there's been the introduction of walking simulators, for lack of a better term. So there's stuff like Firewatch, Gone Home, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, What Remains of Edith Finch. And a lot of these games are very good if you're into that kind of thing, the slower pace, the exploration and stuff. But I was like, imagine if like Giant Sparrow, the guys who did What Remains of Edith Finch, kind of kept that mentality of a walking simulator, but it's co-op instead, and it becomes procedurally generated. So you can do like a 2-hour version, like with you and your friends, when you're going to find, say, a body, but the world is different each and every time. And it's nothing too major. Like you could come across what looks like a haunted house or something like that.
Yeah.
Or you do come across a junkyard with a dog. Nothing kind of like life-changing, but these moments, and each time you do it slightly different. But you could also do a kind of real-time 2-day version when you go on this, like, you know, and obviously the world kind of gets stretches out, and when you sleep, that's when you walk away from it. Obviously it'd only be for the bravest and the most committed, but I was like, it'd be interesting. And even like with the voice chat would only work when you were within proximity to each other. Okay. So if you were away from each other, you couldn't hear each other, and you'd have to go and find each other. So
that's an interesting premise.
You could theoretically be split up. So say you end up in like a haunted house, and say 2 of you went one way, 2 of you went the other. Well, you can't hear the other 2 until you're close enough to hear each other. I just thought that'd be quite interesting.
That's a very interesting premise.
But yeah, but that's it, because obviously there's no...
no. So for me, I was thinking about
actual
this.
Game.
I texted you yesterday and said I can't really think about the kind of video game that I would want to see with this film. But then I was actually on my PlayStation yesterday, and I was looking through my library to find something to play. And it came to me, and I thought, oh, that is actually not a bad idea. Developed by Don't Nod and published by Square Enix, Life is Strange.
Yeah. It's not a million miles away from the walking simulator. It's just more
exactly right. But it's the walking simulator. But it's everything that happens in the film can kind of be justified in a kind of style that Life is Strange is, because Life is Strange is basically, aside from the fantastical,
it's like a narrative adventure.
Yeah, exactly. Aside from the fantastical element that they've got going on in that with her mind control, or it was a long time since I played it, but it's just everything about the way that game feels, the way that game's set out. Because there's a scene where she's training in the train tracks for a start. She is training in a train yard. She's training, and everything like that. That game feels like it would suit like a Stand By Me conversion.
Yeah, I think it would. But as I say, I think with any game, whether it be that style or the walking simulator, and obviously the 2 are not a million miles from each other, is that rather than try to perfectly recreate the film, recreate the tone. You know, it's like it doesn't need to be the exact same story. I think the fact that you can capture the spirit of that film without it having just to be a kind of, you know, oh, well, this is just Stand By Me recreated in video game format. Yeah. But one other thing, just before we get onto facts, just because it suddenly popped into my head, for anyone, like, you know, we were talking about the music, and obviously I mentioned in Legacy, and obviously in regards to video games, Final Fantasy 15. Before Final Fantasy 15, they don't actually use the Benny King version. They actually get in Florence and the Machine to do a cover of Stand By Me for Final Fantasy 15. So if you're a fan of the song, really go and have a listen to the Final Fantasy Florence and the Machine version, because it's a great, speaking of adaptations, adaptation of the Benny King original. But sorry, I just wanted to get off.
No, it's fine, because something popped into my head about Legacy. Because we haven't really mentioned it, is the fact that for Legacy, the poignancy of this film after River Phoenix's death. After he died, this film just felt more, because obviously he died young, and in this film he died young. You know what I mean? So it's just it has a bit of a like a foothold.
I think so.
In the life of River Phoenix, like I'm bastardizing what I want to say, but
I get where you're going. No, I totally get what you're going for, because obviously he did go on to, it's not like he died
the next year. He did My Private Idaho, he did Sneakers, he did...
But regardless, I think when people think back to River Phoenix, and I think when they're thinking about the potential of what he could have become, I still think the first thing that pops up in their mind, for a lot of people, at least, I don't want to speak for everyone, but it certainly is for me, is his performance as Chris Chambers in Stand By Me. And I think people look at this film in particular and go, man, that kid would have been an absolute... And obviously he was already on his way to becoming a superstar. As you say, My Own Private Idaho with Keanu Reeves, he was clearly getting those roles. He died outside the Viper rooms with Johnny Depp or whatever it was. He was already in those circles. But there's something about this performance in particular, I think, when they go back, and maybe those early moments in The Last Crusade, when you really did see that superstar just waiting to happen. You just thought, listen, he's going to get his big role soon. Stand By Me, he's an important part of that. Obviously, Indiana Jones, he has a major role, albeit at the start of the film. But you just thought, you look back at those films, and obviously if you'd watched them back in the day, you'd be like, listen, it's only a matter of time before his name is at the top of a poster, and it's going to be his film. It's going to be the River Phoenix film, or he'll get his franchise or whatever. And obviously it never happened for obvious reasons, but bit of a shame. A bit of a shame is a massive understatement. You know what I mean?
Oh, no, totally. All right, let's cover facts quickly then before we move on to ratings, but I'm pretty sure we've already determined what the ratings are going to be. I've only got a couple. Well, I say I've only got a couple. So, Rob Reiner screened the movie for Stephen King, and he noticed the King was visibly shaken and wasn't speaking. He left the room, and upon his return, told Reiner that the movie was the best adaptation of his work he had ever seen. It'd be quite interesting if that's still the case, because what was that, 86? So
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, in fairness,
Shawshank was 94, so
I wouldn't be surprised. And this is again, it comes back to the idea that Stand By Me is pretty true to the book. It makes some changes, but again, I think even Stephen King would be hard pressed to say.
He did say the changes that were made were for the better. Keith Sutherland claimed in an interview that in one of the locations of the film, a Renaissance fair was being held and the cast and crew attended. Some of them bought some cookies. Unfortunately, the cookies turned out to be pot cookies. And 2 hours later, the crew found Jerry O'Connell crying and high on the cookies somewhere in the park.
Fantastic.
What else have I got here? So Keith Sutherland was famous in this for keeping up with his bully mentality throughout when they weren't filming. So River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, Will Wheaton, and Jerry O'Connell got into a lot of mischief in the hotel. They were staying in during filming. This included throwing all the poolside furniture into the pool, Wheaton fixing video games in the lobby so they could play them for free. I'd love to know how he did that. And Phoenix, spurred on by the other boys, unknowingly covering Keith Sutherland's car in mud, only discovering whose car it was when Sutherland confronted a scared and nervous Phoenix about it later. So you've got a guy who is bullying you on and off set, and then you've gone and messed his car up, and he's come up to you going like,
that's going to be pretty tough. But, in fairness, the results speak for themselves on screen. So who am I to argue with Keith Sutherland's methods?
Stephen King said that the scene with the leeches, which is pulled straight from his novella.
We didn't mention the leeches. Jesus Christ. That's another set piece. I totally forgot.
He was a child. That's it, because we can go on to that, because that's the other fact. So the pond that they all fall into was a man-made pool because the crew wanted them to be safe and secure and did not want to put them in a real pond because they did not know what would be in it. However, Corey Feldman stated in an interview that the joke of the whole thing was the pool was built, buried and filled with water in the beginning of June. And by the time they got to film the scene, it was the end of August. So it had been in the woods for 3 months anyway, so they didn't know what was in it anyway.
Yeah, the water's probably all stagnated and stuff. But that's another great scene. Just, again, low-key horror. Just coming out of the pool when you're young and just being covered by leeches. But
as a male,
it's really hard to stress the idea of putting your hands down your pants and I don't want to be unfair. Women are probably, God bless their souls, they're probably quite used to it, let's be honest. But for a guy, the idea to put your hand down your pants and come out with blood, oh my fucking days. That is a nightmare. And it doesn't matter whether you're 12 or 47. That is the stuff, and especially if there's a leech attached. Jesus Christ.
If you reading between the lines of this next fact, it's sad. Corey Feldman has stated in several interviews that of all the characters he's played, Teddy was actually the closest to his personality and personal life at the time.
Yeah, that's pretty rough considering what the character's like. Yeah.
In the shot where Gordy and Werner running towards the camera with the train right behind them, the train was actually at the far end of the trestle with the two actors on the opposite end. The crew used a 600mm long focus lens that, when shot at the telephoto end, compressed the image so much that it made it look like the train was right behind them. And growing up, it works so well. But I watched the the 4K version of this, and you kind of see it. It doesn't take you out of it. It still looks perfect. Yeah. But after reading that and then seeing it, you kind of see.
Yeah, well, again, it's the I guess the issue with going back and rewatching these films in the way that we're doing, where you're not just revisiting it, you're critiquing it. You know, we are ostensibly picking these movies apart to a certain, and not in a negative way, but you are trying to think about the way it's made, the way they do things. And there are moments, as you say, when you suddenly like, I almost wish I wasn't looking so closely at this because I want to just be caught up in the moment. But yeah, considering it was 86, it still looks pretty special.
So Rob Reiner was an avid non-smoker who campaigned for anti-smoking laws. So the cigarettes that the boys used were made from lettuce leaves. I thought that was quite interesting.
Oh, really? Well, they look legit.
Smoking lettuce leaves, yeah.
Yeah.
According to Andy Lindbergh, a child extra actually threw up for real during the filming of the Bathorama.
Awesome. Yeah. There's a lot of puke, man. A lot of puke.
That was a lot of puke. So Richard Dreyfuss was a high school friend of Rob Reiner. So that's how he ended up doing that.
Well, I mean, Richard Dreyfuss was, let's be clear, I mean, he was still pretty hot. You know, I don't mean that in terms of visually, but you know what I mean? In Hollywood, kind of, Richard Dreyfuss, Jesus Christ. But, you know, he was a pretty big deal. And I think even having his name attached is, I guess even in 86 would be a bit of a boon, I suppose. But, you know, I actually think as small as his role is, there's something about the way he delivers his lines that he has like a legitimate impact on this film. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. So the novella and the film take place in the town of Castle Rock, Maine, and then Oregon, respectively. So the novella was Castle Rock, Maine, and then...
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Sorry, rather than being a different name.
And Castle Rock became the name of Rob Reiner's production company.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, yeah.
You did.
And obviously there's like the TV show and everything. So much of Stephen King's like universe is based around Castle Rock.
I love this. You don't want to live there. I love this next one because the film nearly wasn't made.
What is that?
Coca-Cola bought Embassy Pictures, the film's original production company, and announced it wasn't going to fund the film just 2 days before production was to begin. Norman Lear, who had worked with Rob Reiner for years on All in the Family, because Rob Reiner was famously a child actor before. Norman Lear was one of the three owners of Embassy prior to its sale. He believed in the project enough that he agreed to personally foot the film's $8 million budget.
Oh, thank God. I mean, you wonder in an instance like that as well, because Rob Reiner as a director was still relatively new to the scene, but I wonder if like kind of Spinal Tap kind of helped it get over the line, you know, because Spinal Tap's such a great fucking movie. Yeah. But because that was obviously just a few years before. But
Michael Jackson was asked and did a cover of Benny King's Stand By Me, but Rob Reiner thought the original version better suited the movie, so... Didn't go with that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Jesus Christ. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Michael Jackson, especially when I was younger. You know, he was like my musical hero growing up. My first album was Bad on tape, but even I'm like, I don't want to hear the Michael Jackson version of, it doesn't suit the film. I know we've talked about the fact that Benny King's version was 61 and this is set in 59, but it's easy to let that go. It feels time... I don't know. It feels like it fits in with the rest of the film, with the setting and stuff. You suddenly throw Michael Jackson into this? No, not at all. Thank you.
Right, so two more for me, then we can move on because I'm just seeing the time. The vomit used in Bathorama was made from cottage cheese and blueberry mix.
Dude, that sounds even grosser than actual puke.
That's why Jesus I wanted to say that,
Cottage fucking cheese, man. Rough.
What was the last one I wanted? This was interesting. The train scene took a full week of shooting, making use of 4 small adult female stunt doubles with closely cropped hair, made up to look like the film's protagonists. Plywood planks were laid across the trestles to provide a safer surface on which the stunt doubles could run. So they couldn't find stunt people who matched the kids, so they got 4 like small women basically to dress up as
well. I never noticed, and you know there is. I mean, we've talked about like the set piece in the film. But that still feels like the big one, doesn't it? Like that is the centerpiece of the film.
Well, that's the one that puts you on the edge. That we've already said it. It puts you on the edge. You think, oh my God, could this actually be what takes one of them out?
And even on a visual, I mean, obviously it helps that it's a train, but it feels like a bigger set piece than the rest of the film. Like nothing else in the film, like it doesn't attempt to get this big again. You know, like the junkyard scene, as you said, even the kind of the fantasy of the Bathurama is fun in itself, but there's nothing as like, that almost feels like that's the closest thing to an action movie scene in the middle of Stand By Me. But it speaks to, again, the quality of the film, that it doesn't feel out of place in an otherwise lower key movie like this. And I think part of that is, again, the pace of the movie. You haven't even got time to think about it. It's just on, you just keep going and going and going. Like which is 89 minutes?
87, which is a common 87. Which is a common thread for these films that we're finding, that the pace is moving.
As a comparison point, and I'll be the only person to compare Stand By Me with Fast and Furious 9. But I went to see Fast 9 today. That film is 2 hours and 20 minutes long. That film has no fucking business being nearly 2.5 hours long. It's like, what is this like obsession now with making these long ass movies? You need someone to come in and say, dude, this film's going to be 90 minutes. Get on board. And of course, that doesn't count for all films. But you think, would this film be better if it had, and let's be clear, I know it's a novella, but it's not a small novella. Like there's plenty, you know, this film could have been 2 hours.
Oh, you could have added a lot more to this.
You could have.
Yeah.
But does it need it?
No, it didn't need it. What you get is perfect. Right, anyway, as we've said, so we just said what you get is perfect. Let's do the last two of this now. Let's do the ratings, and then we'll cover next week's film.
Let's be clear. You've hardly buried the lead on that one, have you? Yeah. It's very easy for me. Like in terms of like this is timeless. Like you know, it's set in the late 50s. It doesn't like the only thing that really gives it away as an 80s film is maybe is Corey Feldman, who is quintessentially the 80s kid, I suppose. But he doesn't feel like that kind of quintessential Corey Feldman role. It's a completely timeless film. It works if you're watching it as a kid. It works if you're watching it as an adult. It's a 5-star movie. It's, I think, legitimately a masterpiece. Like, I think it's that good. It's, you know, I'm not saying it's one of my top 10 movies, but it's in and around the conversation. You know, it's right up there. Like this. I don't think there's an argument for this. A 5-star masterpiece for sure for me.
I can't say any more to that. That's
cool. 5 stars. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. So I think that just allows us to jump onto your choice for next week. Will it be another 5-star masterpiece, or will we be rewatching Cyborg next week?
Well, after we mentioned Cyborg, I thought I might have to change what's going on. But also, we've said about Cyborg, and that's quite interesting because I'm going to say 4 rules to you, or directives.
Oh, thank God. I thought for a second then you were going to walk me round the block and come back to, yeah, dude, we're fucking doing Cyborg.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. Any attempt to arrest a senior officer of OCP results in shutdown. That's right. Next week, we're covering RoboCop.
Awesome. I mean, it's just in a completely different way and a very, very different movie to Stand By Me. But I would say... oddly, in its own way, as important to my youth as Stand By Me was. Like, this is a big movie for me.
I felt I had to do a bit more of a build-up for this after my last Tremors.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Just Tremors.
Just give you one word. What are we watching next week? Tremors.
Yeah. And plus, you had to make it abundantly clear that we are, in fact, not doing Cyborg. We're not doing John
We're doing a Cyborg film.
We are doing a Cyborg film. Yeah, I kind of walked you into that one. So yeah, it's a Cyborg film. But while I won't give away the reviews, I will say it's definitely a better movie than Cyborg. No doubt about it.
Although we've said Cyborg about 19 times in this. Oh my God.
Yes, I don't think Cyborg's ever had. Even if you were doing. At this point, even if you did a podcast on Cyborg, I don't think you'd say Cyborg as many times as we fucking said Cyborg.
On that note, it's been a pleasure this week, mate.
Absolute pleasure. So yeah, I hope you can all join us next week for Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, and before I forget, because I always forget, here's Rob telling you where you can actually find us.
Yeah, so we're currently on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Hey You Guys 80s or at Hey You Guys 80s. And we're also on email at heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any emails, any recommendations, or any reviews you have. But whilst we're on about that, wherever you get your podcasts, please also smash the subscribe button. Yes, I said smash.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Leave us a review and leave us some 5-star ratings as well. But make sure they're 5-star ratings.
Yeah. We're not interested in 1 star, 5 star. If it's not going to be 5 star, don't go smashing anything. Just leave your opinion to yourself. 5-star ratings only. But yeah, if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you next week.
Are you